Vendors lie. They're reliable people, they're trying to build a service, but their goals are not your goals. And a lot of times, the person on the phone or the person answering the complaint doesn't really know what they're saying. And a lot of times, they can't really tell you the truth. So the best example I know of this was when I was at LiveGamer, so I was a CTO and head of product. And we integrated about 200 payment methods globally, so that no matter where in the world you are, and no matter what payment method you're using, you can buy coins. Yay. So it turns out that roughly half of the local payment vendors in the third world do not actually believe in keeping accurate accounts. Like we did. We were a seller of record, we had financial records, and we would notice, okay, Korea seems to be off by about 15% across all the payment vendors. And we would ship lists of, you're sure? Yeah, absolutely. You're the first person who ever complained about this. No, we can't. Ship them CSV files of every transaction along with their return codes. And okay, so we think you owe us $13,000 and you think you only owe us $8,500. So here's all the transactions we sent. Can you help us? And then they lost that email. And then we sent it again. And finally, we got somebody who was willing to say, we don't actually store the transactions individually, so we can't answer this question. And we went, you're a payment vendor. You don't store the transactions individually. Okay. So they built something quickly. They went live. Just like all software companies, they have their warts under the covers, and just like every other software company, they can't really admit it. And so they lied. And it was a perfectly reasonable sequence of events that led to them not having the transaction records. But you need to ask, you need to, if someone says something and it doesn't seem to be consistent with what you are experiencing, it probably isn't, and they're probably not telling you the truth. And you just need to be aware of that. Another reason, keep vendors out of your game loop. Local caches, make messages in background threads. If the service fails, your game shouldn't slow down. So this is just super important, and it's often neglected. And again, LiveGamer, the number of our customers who made REST calls in the middle of their game loop was astounding. And we would no, use a local cache. Don't call us directly. The user's clicking on a treasure chest, they're getting 25 gold coins, we get that. Make that call in the background and assume it succeeds and just pop up that little 25. Don't make the REST call out to our servers. Introduce 120 milliseconds of network latency and whatever else could go wrong in there into the middle of your game loop. Design your game to have a background messaging queue. And assume that every now and then your vendors will go down. Super important. So they'll lie and they'll go down. Gosh. This is the biggest lie that's told in all of software. Not really. That would be Oracle telling you it's affordable. But this is a big one, and it's told by almost all game vendors. It takes 4 to 8 hours to integrate our SDK. Exactly. That man has. It's like, no. 4 to 8 hours. First and foremost, it means 8 hours. It doesn't mean 4. 4 hours never happens. Second, 8 hours. If you've already read all the documentation, reading the documentation is not part of that estimate. You have to completely understand the underlying conceptual model of the service. You have to have integrated the service or something like it before, so you have experience doing exactly this task. Your code has to be architected in such a way that the hooks for the integration are already present. Your data model must be completely compatible with their data model and their way of thinking about the world. And you're only looking for about half the functionality. Then you can get that 8-hour integration. And reality is the typical 4 to 8 hour integration takes 2 people about 2 weeks. And the way the game vendors work about this is they go, really? We have other customers that got it done in 4 to 8 hours. It must be your developers. No, I've never heard of it taking that long. Shit, are you sure? The answer is yes. And so the bottom line here is, of course, if they don't have a demo game, and it's not documented with code snippets you can use, go to their competition because their competition does. It can be a crappy demo game, but it still has the use cases that you copy-paste the code from. And if they haven't done it, odds are they haven't thought about it. Also, find someone else who's used them and ask. Okay, next big important thing. What does down mean? Recognize picture. Okay. So, down. Really interesting question. So, what if something takes about 3 minutes to respond? Is it really down? And the answer is, your vendor will say no. It's responding, it's a little slow today, but it's there. What if 5% of the calls fail and it's random, but they succeed on the retry? Is it down? And, this one happens a lot. Calls were 100 milliseconds yesterday, or when you tried it, or when you kicked the tires, but they're now 500 milliseconds. Is it down? And the answer is yes. You've got a game that's relying on this thing. 100 milliseconds to 500 milliseconds matters. But the answer is no. Our monitoring shows the system is up. Yeah. So be careful on this one. And in particular, are your vendors monitoring their vendors? So here's the, Hawken is, one of the world's most brilliant put on your robot suit and beat up your friends games. This is their payment wall. Their payment wall refers to PayPal, which iframes in. Now, what if PayPal's down? Interesting question, right? Because your end user, they're playing Hawken, they're getting their ass kicked. They decide they need to level up and buy a super-powered machine gun. They're going to go back in that game and kill some people. And then they go to buy some coins and PayPal's down. Hawken presented them with an option for PayPal. PayPal wasn't there. Now what happens to that user? Well, they were jonesing to buy some, they were jonesing to spend. Now they're really pissed off and frustrated because, and are they going to come back? No, they're probably going to say, fuck this, and go off and do something else. Because Angry Birds is always out there and it's real easy to play. So ask your vendors whether they monitor their vendors and what happens in the case of a vendor failure for them. Some do, some don't. Read your SLA. So really interesting thing is sometimes SLAs, service level agreements, will define uptime and downtime, or will talk about uptime and downtime, but they don't define it. And that's where you get into that, well, it took a second to return, but that's okay, that's still up. No, it's not. So did they define what up meant? Is there a third-party validation process? I have seriously had this conversation with people. You're down. No, we're not. It's like, well, our calls are failing. Well, our service is up. I don't know why your calls are failing. Check the internet. It's like, really? Shit, really? But people will do this. They have carve-outs for maintenance windows. That's one of the most evil clauses in here because it says we guarantee 99.8% uptime except for maintenance windows, which we can schedule arbitrarily. And I have actually seen services like announce with 2 minutes, we need to go down for a maintenance window. And it's like, no. If you're giving me 2 minutes notice, it ain't no maintenance window, much less a regularly scheduled maintenance window, which that email had. And they don't define remedies. So the common practice is to refund money based on the amount of time they're down. So if they go down for a day, you get 1/30 of that month's fee. It's like, really? If you go down for a day, the damages to me are way bigger than 1/30 of my monthly nut. So look for that. And you just have to go through all this stuff. What does up mean? What does down mean? What's a response time? Another nice one is downtime doesn't count until you notice. So you have to call in and report, and that's when they start recording downtime for purposes of giving you the refund that doesn't cover it anyway. So iron that out. Okay, now let's talk about you. So the deep truth about each and every one of you, you are your own worst vendor. I said, make sure that you monitor your vendors. I bet you your back-end systems are not. It's even harder when, it's your friend who works across the cube from you who wrote that code and it goes down or failed in some way. You have to basically internally, when you're building back-end services, pretend that those people are alien, evil people from another planet and hold them to the same standards you hold the actual alien people from another planet. Remember this, the internet is always failing. People don't really get this, and it's fascinating. So internetpulse.net, you can go there any time of day, any day of week, there will be at least one backbone service provider that's sucking relative to another backbone service provider. This is Keynote Systems is a great monitoring company. They're way too expensive, don't use them, but appreciate the free service they provide. So when I was writing these slides, I was like, hey, let me go see how the internet's doing. So this is not like the worst it's ever been. I've seen far worse. But NTT to Cogent. So the way you read it is, okay, a packet starts here, goes down, hits the red zone, and then goes over to Cogent. At that moment in time, NTT servers located on the NTT part of the backbone were having trouble talking to servers on the Cogent part of the backbone. Servers living in Verizon land had some trouble talking to SBC. Okay, so what does that mean? It means that no matter how beautifully architected his service is, there will be parts of the world with people running your games who will have difficulty talking to it. Again, don't put servers in your game. Just don't. This will kill you every time. There will be lots of people who are just unhappy. Now, put a phone on the end of that puppy. Mobile internet is slow and in a state of partial failure. Because even when you're on the other thing about the internet is in a state of partial failure, your developers will never plan for this because you put them in a nice office on a nice high-speed connection so they could do their job. Your developers never experience the internet in its raw form. So your odds are the client code they're writing builds in some assumptions about that nice, stable fiber connection they have. And then, you put it out on a phone, it moves out from that simulator on Fiber Connect to, being actually, things are bad. And this is just the way the world always is. Okay? So one really important thing that people often miss, server performance doesn't matter that much. Fire up some more servers, whatever. The interesting issue about background services is total round-trip time from client device, right? So if it costs 200 milliseconds to do a round trip from the phone, which remember is on that slow and partially failing internet thing, and your server code is slightly inefficient and uses an extra 10 seconds because 10 milliseconds, who cares? You went from 200 milliseconds to 210 milliseconds. It doesn't matter, it's a small percentage. Optimizing server performance is something that your back-end team will really, really want to do. And it's really, really pointless. Optimize for reliability, and then do all your performance work in the client. So, what matters is making the call in the background, or getting the stuff before you need it, or performing the operation locally, assuming it will succeed, and calling the server just to double check in the background. If you think they earned 25 gold coins, yeah, you need to double check with the server, but you can really just, in the client side, give them the 25 points and then call the server in the background thread. And if you do that stuff, then all the rest of this stuff becomes much less painful, right? Okay. So, this is a controversial one. You wander Silicon Valley or the world today and everyone will claim to be data-driven. They've got their NoSQL data store where they're storing petabytes per hour of really important mission-critical information, and it's just stupid. Really stupid. Sometimes I get in trouble for calling things stupid, but this one is. So, data-driven is just a bad idea. What's the right idea is curious. Have a team of people who are experts and have a team of people who ask questions. And the process is, hey, that's a really interesting question. Okay, what would an answer to that question be? What data, if we had it, would give us the answer on a silver platter? How do we get that data? That's the cycle for empirical analysis of your application. The idea that you're going to store petabytes of data and then you're going to hire some astrophysicist away from their telescope in Hawaii and he's going to know how to do the statistical analysis and magically come up with a business insight And I'm not even making that up. I actually know a company that did that. It's intriguing that people could actually behave that way. You know, all I need to do is find the right PhD and they'll solve my business problem. It's like, well, if they were really, really good at solving business problems and that's what they like to do, would they really have gone into astrophysics? So, ask the questions. Data is easy. At this point, the cloud is there, NoSQL data stores are there, machine learning toolkits are there. The important thing is asking the right questions. And asking the right questions involves thinking. Okay? Now, sometimes things work. That's really great, right? That advertising campaign really worked and we tripled our user base. How'd the servers handle? Oh, they melted down, but you know, the advertising campaign worked. Actually had this happen to me too. This would happen when I was at Live Gamer. We had monitoring that was going, hey, you know, 3x the number of calls from yesterday, you know, day over day. Called the customer and they're like, really? They called marketing. Marketing said, yeah, we launched new. The customer called me back like, yeah, we did 3x our traffic. It's like, okay, how are you handling it, guys? Because you didn't give us any notice. And in the contract, you're supposed to give us notice when you launch major marketing campaigns that will increase traffic by more than 50%. And they're like, well, actually, we're melting down. It's like, okay. So, interesting. You will have a marketing team. They will advertise. You are running servers. Sometimes the advertisements will actually work. And when they do, you have to have the capacity. That means you have to talk to marketing. That means marketing has to talk to you. And that means, in general, you should have a lot of surplus capacity around because no matter how good your auto-scaling is, it's not instantaneous. Okay? Final area of conversation. Is this all good? Everyone feeling okay with this? Good. Okay, so final thing. Super important. Legal stuff. And this is an actual photo. I believe he's in Ghana. So, you know, in the former parts of the British colonial empire, they still wear the funny wigs. Do they in...
No, not back then.
Oh, only in Africa these days?
See, our hair is awesome. We don't need white wigs.
There you go. So, this is just a fundamental fact of life. Lawsuits are expensive, and you never actually, you know, you can put lawsuits into your contracts, but you're never actually going to sue people. It's just too expensive, too painful, and it takes too friggin' long. 3 years later, I get justice, but in the meantime, my business is dead. Most of the time, the terminology is incredibly vague because it's written by lawyers who don't understand technology, and then you get this question of, so what does a user ID really mean? And you know, the legal system can spend decades trying to figure out what a user ID is when it's completely obvious to everyone else. Most legislation is from decades or centuries ago. This is something that people often don't realize. How many people know what the controlling legal authority for internet gambling is right now? That's right, it's the Wire Act from 1967.
Wow.
And you know what it was? It was designed by a rabid FBI that was looking to crush the mafia, and so proposed a law to outlaw sports betting between states. Because the mafia had all the horse racing betting, and they figured this is how we'll go after the mafia's revenue stream. It says nothing about craps or poker or anything else. But it has been interpreted to cover gambling more generally, except, you know, about 2 years ago they kind of rolled that back a little bit to make it only about sports betting. And so as a result, you know, is online gambling illegal in the US? As far as I can tell, if it's slot machines running in one state, paying out to another state, then there is no controlling legal authority for that. Except that some of the feds think it's illegal and some don't. And the state of Utah says, no fucking way are you running that slot machine in Utah. You know, and also, no way are you paying out in Utah. So as long as the wires don't go through Utah, it's okay. Except, So, 1967, the Wire Act. A piece of legislation designed to crush the mafia, which is in fact the only piece of legislation we have about online gambling. Exactly. So, 4.5 decades old, and who knows what it really means, because it's from before the internet. I think it actually refers to like telegraphs or something, I don't know. So, Important. Get things in writing clearly and always have a backup plan. So like the best lawyer I know is not actually the smartest one. I can recommend him. I probably should say his name after saying that. But what he does is he says, okay, this term in paragraph 3, what does it really mean? Can we add a paragraph explaining it? And everyone's like, oh, do we have to? And he's like, well, it could mean different things in different states, and we don't want to rely on the background interpretation of the underlying statutes of these different states, so why don't we just state it explicitly? And everyone's like, oh man, okay. And you wind up with a contract that was 4 times longer than it needs to be, but it's essentially independent of the fact that this company is in Washington and this company is in New Mexico. And it's like annoying, and yet at the end of it you feel good about the contract because you know what it means. Super, super important. The legal system is not going to fix itself, not in my lifetime. And so that means that you just have to actually spend the time and effort. You got to read the SLAs. You really do. And then anytime a term could be interpreted differently, or you're not sure what it means, insert some more language. For the avoidance of doubt, this is covered, but this is not. And put concrete cases in there. So, that's my maxims on multiplayer games. It's all about the social structure around them. We're doing really amazing stuff. So.
Alright guys, any questions for either of them? All your questions are answered.
So on that very last point, when you're saying, okay, you've got an SLA, those things are usually downloaded, when you're signing up on their service or whatever. So, it always seems to me like you can either take it or leave it, but you're saying you go and